Hey guys, what's up? Nick here once again, and today we're going to be going over the top 10 worst bosses in the Twisted Metal franchise. So let's get right into it. For this list, I'm not excluding any of the games from the entire Twisted Metal series. That's going to be from Twisted Metal 1 all the way up to 2012. I'm also going to be ranking these based off three main criteria. The first is too frustrating for the player / too complicated. Basically, if you're going against this boss, how frustrating is it? Is it going to make you throw a controller out the window? And how complicated is it? Is it just overly complicated to the point where it's trial and error based until you figure it out? The second criteria is going to be, is it too easy and or just straight up boring? So unlike the first one, it may not be necessarily frustrating or complicated, but it could be the opposite spectrum to where it's just straight up boring. And for the third criteria, is it too long or is it too short? What this means is I think a perfect boss battle should be right in the middle. It shouldn't be too long or it just takes up way too much of your time, and it also shouldn't only take just a couple of minutes to where it just feels like it was a waste of your time. So with that criteria out of the way, let's get to the list. Starting at number 10 is going to be Cousin Eddie from Twisted Metal Head On. Now, Cousin Eddie was a brand new character to the Twisted Metal franchise in Twisted Metal Head On, and it first came out on the PSP, the PlayStation Portable System, and he was a much better boss fight, I will say, in the portable version versus the PS2 port, but I gotta take both into consideration for this list, and I gotta be honest, even in the PSP version, still Cousin Eddie to me is a pretty boring fight, and he really is not that difficult. The main reason he's at number 10 here is just he's so easy. He's basically a carbon copy of the Minion fight from Twisted Metal Black. However, I personally think they did Minion a lot better. It was a much better level to fight Minion on in Minion Stadium compared to this dilapidated version of LA in Head On versus Cousin Eddie. They try to drag out the fight a little bit longer by adding his little ATV minions to start out the fight, but they're all like 2 hits and they're dead. It takes literally a minute to kill all of them, and then once they're all dead, he comes out of his shell and now he can drive around, but he's got a shield on him just like Minion did in Black. And just like Minion in Black, he has panels all around his body. And now one thing that kind of sticks out at first is, oh, they made this actually more difficult than Twisted Metal Black, where there's a panel on top of the vehicle. However, it's extremely easy to hit this one, even with regular machine guns, if you just jump up and down. And with the ability upgrades in this game, you can literally take out Cousin Eddie within seconds because you can freeze him even if he has a shield, where you cannot do that in Twisted Metal Black with Minion. So literally the fact that you can freeze Cousin Eddie, you can take him out within seconds. He's a super easy boss, and because of that, he's just extremely forgettable. So that's why I feel number 10 is a good spot for him. Coming in number 9, we have Piecemeal from Twisted Metal Small Brawl. As you guys know, I love Small Brawl. It's actually my most played and most favorite Twisted Metal in the entire series. I've talked about this in previous videos, so it does pain me at putting one of the bosses on this list, but I can't hide from the fact that Piecemeal is sadly a pretty degrading final boss. The concept itself is kind of unique, where you fight 4 regular opponents, and once one of them dies, all of them disappear to essentially resurrect Piecemeal, whose backstory is that they're created from all the broken parts of the past opponents that you've destroyed. I like this idea, I like his design, I like the fact that he can use any special weapon in the entire game against you, which again is pretty cool, but the fight just is super long. It's very drawn out to the point where it just becomes tedious. He's not very difficult, even though his stature is very intimidating. He's not necessarily more strong than anybody else in the entire series. He just has a huge health pool. So he's really just a big bullet sponge. You can get away from him pretty easily. It is kind of annoying that he can use a shield against you to block your freezes and attacks and whatnot. And the other thing too is that makes it even more frustrating is the level that he's on has almost no weapon pickups whatsoever. They take forever to come back. And it just kind of adds to the tediousness of this fight, because once you've killed the one opponent, he spawns, you do a little bit of damage, he disappears, and now you have the remaining 3 opponents to go against. You kill another one, he respawns, rinse and repeat. And pretty much no matter how good of a player you are, this fight can take anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. It's a very tedious fight, and I really just wish it would have been a lot shorter. Coming in at number 8, we have RC Car from Twisted Metal 4. Now this one was kind of tough because Twisted Metal 4, as you guys know, is the only game in the series that has an opponent or a boss battle after every single level ends. So once you've killed every regular opponent in the level, a boss comes out. I'm one of the people that are pretty notorious for saying I don't like this change. I did not enjoy this. I never will say that I enjoy it. And RC Car for me is the one that sticks out the most as a sore thumb to those boss battles in the game, in the sense of him just being extremely boring. His design is unique enough, I will admit, and I think the level is a really good level, being that it was the inspiration for Twisted Metal Small Brawl in the bedroom, but the fight itself is extremely lackluster. He's got a really weak special weapon that misses 90% of the time. He's got a pretty low amount of health compared to other bosses in the entire game, and you can defeat him within a few seconds if you're good enough and know what you're doing. So yeah, for me anyway, RC Car is extremely boring. Nothing really to write home about, and I feel like 8 is a good space for him. Coming in at number 7 is Darkseid from TM3. The main reason I'm putting him on this list is mainly because Darkseid was such an iconic character from Twisted Metal 1, and I absolutely loved the idea of a semi-truck being in the Twisted Metal contest, and seeing him return in Twisted Metal was a sight to see. It was a treat. And I remember as a kid, the first time I heard Darkseid is approaching, and you have to fight him as a boss on the second level of the game, it really threw me off at first, and it was kind of exciting. But then, once you go against him, you realize he could have literally just been a regular character in the game. He doesn't really feel like a boss. His special weapon essentially is a ripoff of Firestarters from the same game, and just with an added freeze ability. So yeah, he doesn't really have anything special going on for him. He has a little bit more armor than some of the characters in the game, but I would even argue like Sweet Tooth has more armor than Darkseid, it feels like. So that's why for me, Darkseid was more of a bummer and a disappointment more than anything, but the fact that he's so easy to go against is why I'm putting him at number 7. And coming in at number 6, we have Tower Tooth from Twisted Metal Head On. Now this one I was actually going to put lower on the list. I didn't want to put it this high on the list, but I'm going to put it at number 6 because of just how boring this fight is, and mainly because of the AI is so horribly inept. I don't know what they did here, if it was a last-minute ditch effort just to make the fight last longer, but in Twisted Metal Head On the final level, you fight Darktooth. And then once you defeat Darktooth, which is also kind of a lame boss, but I like him more than Tower Tooth because he's actually kind of a challenge. And once you defeat him, then the game throws Tower Tooth at you, which is kind of frustrating. At least for me it was, because now you're going against another boss right after you just fought a boss. And not only that, but he has a huge health pool, he uses a shield constantly, and he's got a pretty good, strong special attack that does a lot of damage to you if you're too close to him and or you have a card with weak armor. So all of that together is pretty frustrating, but then at the same time, once you learn that the AI's pattern is really terrible and he can just get stuck going back and forth forever on this one street, you can kill him from a distance really easily as long as you have weapons stacked up. So I find this boss kind of on both spectrums. He's both frustrating and really stupid, but also at the same time, he's way too easy and it just becomes a long, tedious venture to take him out, and it's boring. So that's why I feel like kind of in the middle of the list at number 6 is a fair pairing for Tower Tooth. Coming at number 5 is Darktooth from TM2. This one I know is going to get a lot of hate. I know a lot of people love Darktooth and the story behind him, and I get that. I love his design in TM2. I like his lore in TM2. That is not the reasoning for him on this list at all, of course. The main reason he's on this list is the frustrating factor, and also just it takes way too long to defeat him. I know I'm not the best TM2 advocate. I'm not the best player of TM2. I will say that right now. But I will easily say that Darktooth is probably one of the most frustrating bosses to go against in the entire series. And not only is he frustrating and really tough to go against because he's a huge vehicle, he's very intimidating, he has a ton of armor, and he does a massive amount of damage. But not only that, but he just takes too long to kill. Even when you finally think you defeated him, now you have to fight the floating head of Darktooth. And thankfully the floating head's pretty easy to defeat, but I remember even as a kid I just felt cheated because this is all in succession of the final level. Just like I talked about with Tower Tooth and Head On, you not only have to fight 5 regular characters, I think it might be even more than that, but you have to fight a ton of regular characters in this last level, survive all of that, and then you have to survive Darktooth. And then once you defeat him, now you have to survive his floating head. So yeah, all around just a very frustrating boss. Never been a huge fan of him, but I can kind of forgive some of his issues because of how iconic his design is. I like his backstory and all that, and that's why I feel number 5 is a fair placement. Coming in at number 4 is Sweet Tooth's Carnival of Carnage in TM 2012. I know this one might be confusing as well. Probably people are thinking, why is this not your number 1 or number 2? because I will admit this is a very frustratingly long final battle. Essentially, the entire level is one boss fight, which we've never really seen before in a Twisted Metal contest. I will give them a little bit of points for creativity here, but all in all, it's a very frustrating and long, tedious process to finally beat this level. And it's a lot of trial and error gameplay, which if you are new to the channel, I'm going to be honest with you, I complain about this a lot. Trial and error gameplay is not my cup of tea. A good example of it is like Dark Souls games, where you run into an area, you're meant to die, you're meant to fail, you get destroyed, and you have to keep going back and doing it again and again and again until you finally are successful. I understand why people like that kind of gameplay. I'm just not that kind of a fan. So that's why when I go against boss battles like Sweet Tooth's Carnival of Carnage, which is literally just trial and error, try it again and again and again until you finally figure it out, it's very frustrating to the player. Thankfully, this one does give you some checkpoints here and there, so you don't have to restart the entire level, unless you're playing in a twisted mode anyway. And so that's why I think number 4 is a fair placement for this one, because in my opinion, it's a little bit frustrating, but it's not overly frustrating. It's just more tedious and long than anything. But it's also not boring either, because there's a lot to do in this level. There's a lot to see, and especially I remember my first time playing through it, I honestly thought it was pretty neat. Again, my only real gripe with it was just how long it was, and it was a little frustrating having to just rinse and repeat until you figured it out. So that's why I think number 4 is a fair placement. Coming in at number 3, our top 3 here is going to be Warhawk from Twisted Metal Black. Now, I know in the past I've said Warhawk is the worst boss in the entire series, but after coming up with this list and thinking over again and again and again, I realized that Warhawk, he's pretty bad, but he's not the number 1 spot. But I do think he's definitely in the top 3. So the reason I dislike Warhawk is not because of his design. I think, you know, a fighter helicopter is pretty cool in a Twisted Metal game, and I think the boss itself is intimidating, and the music's great, and the level is fine. It's a small little circular pad up in the skyscraper over, I think it's New York. I don't remember exactly which city it's supposed to be, but that being said, it's still a cool boss, and it's a cool boss fight. But that's where everything else just starts to go downhill. The actual gameplay is literally just rinse and repeat, trial and error until you figure it out. I remember as a kid when I first played Twisted Metal Black, it took me, I'm not afraid to admit, it took me a solid 30 minutes to an hour to finally figure out how to do any damage to his shield. And what do you have to do damage to the shield, you may ask? Well, you have to wait until these giant tanker trucks jump onto the platform with you that chase you around, and they're basically just little minions. Once you defeat them, which thankfully they are pretty weak, you have to wait until Warhawk flies over you so you destroy the tanker to do some damage to the shield. You have to do this 3 times in order to finally get rid of the shield to fight Warhawk mano a mano. Thankfully, once the shield is gone, he is pretty weak, but it's very frustrating to new players especially that the only weapons that really do any damage to him or affect him are anything with homing capabilities. And they don't really give you a whole lot of options on this level to begin with. From what I remember, the most things you can pick up are fire missiles. And he doesn't just stay in one spot for too long. There is certain sections that you can time it right where he will float in the middle of the map for a few seconds where you can do some damage. But for the most part, he's going to be flying around, shooting at you from every angle, and he's going to try pushing you off the map. And it's very frustrating, it really is. Now, as a veteran of Twisted Metal Black, I can beat Warhawk really easily to the point where he's just a snooze fest at this point, because once you've learned the exploits and once you've learned how to defeat him, yeah, he's super easy and he's just a snore every time you go against him. Once you've learned that trial and error gameplay and you know what to do now, there's just no substance to him. And again, that's why I feel number 3 is a fair placement, because I don't think he's the worst boss of all time, because he is able to be defeated easily. He's not always going to be frustrating, but I think the fact that he is very, very frustrating for new players, and on top of that, he just becomes a snore fest once you figured it out. So yeah, that's why I feel number 3 is a fair spot for Warhawk. And at number 2, we have Sweet Tooth from Twisted Metal 4. I know. Everybody and their mother is probably commenting already, why are you putting Sweet Tooth so low on this list? The main reason for that is because I know that you can exploit him super easily. I get that. I know you can use some mines at the top of the teleporter. He goes through it, he flies to his death, instant kill. You can beat him literally within seconds. However, and I should have, I guess, stated this at the beginning of the video, but I'm not taking into account exploits for this list. Even Warhawk you can actually exploit pretty easily, but I'm still not going to move him around on the list. So Sweet Tooth, without exploits, is a pain in the ass. There's no way around it. There was a reason why he was #1 for the best special in the entire series. Mainly because he uses one special weapon, and that can pretty much kill 80 to 90% of all the vehicles in the game in one hit. That, of course, is if you're not shielding or teleporting or just trying to get away in general. But his special is so strong that if you get hooked into it, it's basically impossible to get out of it unless, again, you can either shield or teleport out of it. So it's just an extremely aggravating fight. Like, no matter who you are, whether you're a pro or you're brand new to the game. If you're brand new, it's absolutely frustrating because you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to fight this guy. You don't know what his special is capable of. And by the time you figure it out, it's too late. You've lost all your lives. And in Twisted Metal 4, you don't restart the level if you lose all your lives. You restart the whole tournament, which even adds more frustration to it. At least in the Twisted Metal 2012 fight, and the Sweet Tooth's Carnival of Carnage, if you lose all your lives, you can at least restart the level. You don't have to worry about restarting the whole tournament. So Sweet Tooth, it's just a very annoying fight, because just like with Dark Tooth, for instance, you still have to kill enemies before Sweet Tooth spawns. So you have to survive those enemies first, with hopefully not losing any of your lives, and then you have to fight this egregious character. Now, the character themselves, or the vehicle themselves, the Sweet Tooth, I should say, doesn't have that big of armor. They are relatively easy to kill if you're able to freeze them a lot and you're able to get away from their special weapon, and of course, if you can exploit them. But the main thing for Sweet Tooth is just that special weapon, man. It's so frustrating to go against. It's not a long or a short fight either. I would argue it's probably more on the longer side, again, if you're not using exploits. So that's why for me, I really can easily say Sweet Tooth from TM4 is at the #2 spot. And coming in at #1. Now this one is probably no shock to anybody here if you're a fan of the channel. If you are brand new, you gotta know that I absolutely hate Iron Maiden from Twisted Metal 2012. I know some people have said that Sweet Tooth's Carnival of Carnage is actually worse of a fight than Iron Maiden, and I can understand why. Technically, in certain aspects, it can be even a longer fight, but I'm looking at Iron Maiden in the sense of just how tedious this fight is and how long it drags on for. And I will admit, I am also kind of rating this based on playing this on Twisted mode, because in order to get Warthog unlocked, you have to beat the entire game on Twisted and get all the gold medals. And this is the only boss in the game, in my opinion, that is so aggravating to go against on Twisted that I almost broke a controller. I've never been that mad before in a Twisted Metal in my life, and that's why I have to give the crown to Iron Maiden. So the way that this is set up is it's on a very narrow and small level that essentially is just a giant canyon that you drive around and you can fall to your death. But in 2012, you don't insta-die if you fall off, you just get some damage done to you. But on top of that, you have this giant robot woman who's chasing you around, constantly shooting at you, and she has a huge health pool. The only way to do damage to Iron Maiden at the beginning, because she has a shield on, of course, is you have to shoot her by sacrificing Dollface, or one of Dollface's minions, basically, into this launcher that creates a nuke that you then soar through the air. You have to control it through the air through a very narrow space. You can't go too high, too low, too left, or too right. Otherwise, you hit an invisible wall and it blows up and you have to redo the whole thing. And not only that, you have to keep following it as she glides backwards, taunting you, which is very frustrating in itself, but she constantly shoots missiles at you that can do damage to the missile, and if it takes too many hits, it explodes, and again, you have to rinse and repeat. In order to get this person to sacrifice to the missile launcher, you need to first destroy their vehicle, so it's essentially going against like one regular car. However, you're also at the same time being bombarded by 2 or 3, I think it's 2, of their security vehicles, which are just basically 2 other vehicles. So you're essentially fighting 3 regular opponents at all times, trying to get this one person out of the car to then throw into this grinder to sacrifice them to be created or turned into a missile. And it all sounds kind of cool at first. I will admit the design is unique and it's interesting the first time you play it, but it just becomes very tedious and very long-winded. And there's so many layers to this fight, and that's what I think makes it the most frustrating in my opinion. So once you get past that first initial spot, right, you finally kill the car, you get the leader, the faction leader, you drag them to this grinder, which you have to sit in front of for literally like a minute and a half. It's very frustrating while you're being bombarded by the other security vehicles and, of course, the giant Iron Maiden herself. You finally launch the missile, you finally get and hit her, and then now you gotta do it again. But this time, the launcher itself is moving on the level, so you have to do this while it's mobile, which adds a little bit more frustration to the fight. Once you finally hit her again, now you have to fight her with, if I'm remembering right, there's so many sections to this fight, so forgive me if I forget one of them. I believe she starts flying around the level with this giant cage force field essentially around her, and if you're outside the force field, you start taking damage or you insta-die. It's one of the two. And so you have to stay within this range of her giant cage. And while doing this, you can finally do damage to her because her shield is now depleted. So you essentially just keep shooting her until she wears down and then she falls onto the bridge. Now you shoot her again and keep shooting her again and again and again while dodging her missiles. Once she falls off the bridge, you think, oh, thank God, we finally defeated her. Easy fight. Well, you know, quote unquote easy. Nope. Now her head starts flying around just like Darktooth in TM2. And again, it's just like, it's so annoying. It's at this point, you've already been on this fight for at least 20 minutes. So you're like, wow, finally, you know, that felt kind of satisfying to finally throw her off the bridge. But then they have to throw the flying head at you just for one last fuck you. It's so annoying. It's so frustrating. And now this flying head is going way above you. And in the 2012, there's not a whole lot of missiles that can do a lot of far range damage like that, especially if they're going way above your vehicle. So it is kind of difficult to actually do damage to the head. Again, it's not super powerful. It doesn't have a ton of armor, but it still does a lot of damage to you if you're not paying attention. And by the way, if you die once, you have to restart the whole fight. There's no lives in 2012, and there's no garage either that you can go to get a different vehicle if you're running low on health. So you have to do all of this in one go, basically a perfect run. So again, a lot of trial and error is involved to figure out what you have to do in the first place to do damage to her. And then you have to go through like 6 different phases of this battle to finally take her out. And this is the mid boss. It's not even the final boss of the game. So yeah, my God, dude, even on normal, I think this is still a frustratingly long and annoying boss to the point where I feel putting them at number 1 is a totally fair placement. So that essentially is my top 10 worst bosses in the Twisted Metal series. You guys know by now that with my rankings, I'm in no way, shape, or form saying this is a definitive list, and if you disagree, you're wrong. I want to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions. I want to see your lists in the comment section below. So let me know, what is your top 10 worst bosses in Twisted Metal? I'm super excited to hear your guys' comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like, share your support as always. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Peace out, everybody. I'm good. Woo! Yes! Oh my God, that was perfect. All I can do now is suck him. Suck him! Yeah! Oh shit, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I can't stop the suck. Get away from me. All I can do is suck. I'm sorry. You were health and then you weren't.